All right, welcome everyone to another deep dive with us. This time we're going to be tackling a topic that is, well, I'm just going to say it, kind of creepy.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The psychology of evil.
Yeah.
We're going to be trying to understand, based on a whole bunch of YouTube videos we watched, how seemingly good people, right, normal people,
Right.
can be influenced to do really bad things. And what those warning signs are that maybe we can all be on the lookout for.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really struck me going through all these videos is
Yeah.
just how these situations like cults and stuff exploit these really basic human needs.
Yeah.
You know, the need for belonging, the need for meaning, for a purpose. And the really scary part, I think, is that these tactics, they aren't limited to these, really extreme situations. You see shades of them everywhere in everyday relationships.
Oh, yeah, for sure. One thing that really grabbed me at the start of one of the videos, Charisma on Command, is talk about how easy it is for like normal persuasion tactics to be weaponized, and they use all these examples. Jim Jones, Charles Manson, Keith Raniere. I mean,
Yeah, the big ones.
just jaw-dropping stuff. But it's not even just about the true crime aspect. It's the psychology.
Right.
Like, what is actually driving all this? And how can these things happen?
Totally. And one of the things they talk about in the videos in Charisma on Command is how these groups systematically go about dismantling your existing support systems. They get you away from your family, your friends, and then they replace those bonds with, well, their own version.
Oh, it's like they create this void and then they just fill it up.
Yeah, exactly. They make you dependent on the group.
There was this one quote from a former Manson family member in one of the videos that just stuck with me. She talked about how she was like so desperate for love and acceptance and how Manson just totally took advantage of that.
Oh, yeah.
And it makes you think, I'm sure most people listening have probably felt that longing to belong at some point, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty universal.
It is. It's a really common human experience. And that's exactly why it's so important to be aware of these tactics. Cults, and really any manipulative person, they specifically target people who are feeling, lost, lonely, insecure.
Right.
And they use language to their advantage, calling each other, brother and sister.
Yeah, it's like that artificial family.
Exactly. They try to make you feel like you found your tribe and like you're finally home.
It's like in that Jim Jones documentary, right? When they all moved to Jonestown in Guyana. And there's this former resident talking about how their only source of information was like Jones's voice blasting through the loudspeakers all day and night. It's just...
Yeah, total control, total isolation.
Crazy.
It's classic. I mean, you see it with Manson, you see it with NXIVM.
It's like a pattern.
It is. It's a pattern. They cut you off from the outside world, control everything you see and hear.
Right, like an echo chamber.
Exactly. It's like they're trying to build a whole new reality for you. And it becomes almost impossible to think critically. I mean, you could even start seeing your own family as the enemy.
Wow.
It's wild how effective this stuff can be.
And so then, like, if you're in that situation and someone tries to, like, speak up or ask a question...
Ooh, that's dangerous territory.
Yeah, I bet.
That's when the punishment kicks in. These groups are all about rewarding obedience and really coming down hard on anyone who dissents.
It's so messed up.
Do you remember that scene in the Manson documentary where all his followers were mimicking his every move?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was, like, really creepy.
They were basically trying to erase their own personalities and become, like, carbon copies of him. It's mind control, plain and simple.
I mean, how do you even begin to, like, recognize that you're being manipulated in a situation like that?
Well, the Charisma on Command video talks about this tactic they call fake reciprocity.
Fake reciprocity.
Yeah, like you think about how Manson would promise his followers all these things. Love, acceptance, power, to create this sense of obligation, like they owed him.
So they'd feel indebted to him.
Exactly. And they'd feel like they had to stay in the group to, make good on that debt.
It's kind of like when someone gives you an unexpected gift.
Right.
And then you feel pressured to give something back, even if you don't really want to.
Yeah, it's playing on that natural human desire to want to be fair and reciprocate.
But in these situations, it's not fair at all.
No, it's a way to keep you off balance and maintain control.
And the scary thing is, it doesn't just happen in cults, right?
Right. You can find these tactics everywhere. In all kinds of relationships, even positive ones, Think about that, like overbearing friend who's always doing favors for you.
Oh, I think we all know that person.
And then they expect you to always be there for them no matter what. It's that same kind of dynamic.
So how do we protect ourselves from this?
Self-awareness, for sure. Pay attention to how you feel in certain situations and around certain people. Do you feel pressured to conform? Are you afraid to speak your mind?
Okay, that makes sense. Charisma on Command also talked about how these groups use like really specific language to control how you think. Like, NXIVM had all those weird terms, suppressives, the fall. They even used enrollment instead of selling.
Oh, yeah, it's all about controlling the narrative.
Totally.
By controlling the language, they're controlling how you think about things. And then it makes it even harder to recognize that you're being manipulated because you're operating within their framework,
Wow.
It's subtle, but it's powerful.
The video does say that specialized language isn't always a bad thing, right? I mean, think about, like, scientific terms.
Yeah, good point.
Because they said the key is open discussion. Like, if you can't ask about a word or a phrase without feeling, like, guilty or disloyal, that's a huge red flag.
It's a sign they don't want you thinking critically. Imagine, you're signing a contract, and every time you ask about a term, the other person says, "Don't you trust me?"
Oof. Yeah, that would be super sketchy.
That's manipulation 101.
So we've talked about isolation, punishment, fake reciprocity, language manipulation.
It's a lot to watch out for.
What other warning signs are there?
Well, there's this really interesting point in one of the Channel 5 Clips videos.
Yeah.
They talk about how even people who are doing harm often build up these elaborate justifications in their minds to protect themselves from guilt. They use the example of drug dealers who say, well, the market would exist with or without me.
So they convince themselves that they're not really responsible.
Exactly. They try to distance themselves from the consequences.
Wow. So the video describes this as like a deeply antisocial, alienated, nihilistic worldview where people feel powerless to change this, like, doomed society.
Right. It's almost like they've given up on hope, and so they feel like their actions are justified, even if they're harmful.
It's bleak.
It is bleak. And it raises this huge question, right? Do these people actually see themselves as doing anything wrong?
Like, do they actually lack a conscience?
That's the question the video poses. Does anyone actually embrace and consciously spread evil, or are they always creating justifications?
That's a deep one.
It really gets you thinking about the nature of evil and, like, what drives people to do these things.
Can you commit evil acts and truly believe you're doing the right thing? Or is it always some level of self-deception?
I think the human capacity for self-deception is pretty huge,
Oh, totally.
We're really good at rationalizing our behavior, even when it's messed up.
Okay, that's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And we're just getting started. We've got a lot more ground to cover in this deep dive.
We do. We're going to be looking at even more examples of how harmless thoughts can turn dark.
Oh, can't wait.
And this whole concept of, like, micro-progressions, the idea that evil doesn't always announce itself, it just kind of creeps in.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, it's going to get interesting. Yeah, it makes you think about how that actually plays out in real life, Like the Focus Femme motivation videos, they talk about how what we call evil, it can actually start with these, like, seemingly harmless fantasies.
Oh.
They use the example of Ted Bundy.
Right.
The serial killer.
Right.
And how he talked about his fantasies, like, escalating over time, becoming more and more disturbing.
Yeah, it's like that slippery slope thing, right? You start with one small compromise and then another and another, and pretty soon you're somewhere you never thought you'd be.
Exactly.
And it makes you wonder about all those moments when we choose to look away,
Right.
Like, ignore that little voice in our head saying something's not right.
Yeah, that's that micro-progressions idea, right? You gradually become desensitized to stuff that would have totally freaked you out before.
Oh, yeah.
And there's this really intense quote in one of the Jordan B. Peterson Clips videos.
Okay.
It's about how, like, you don't just suddenly start watching child pornography. He says you don't get to that point without hundreds or even thousands of hours of, like, increasingly demented voluntary fantasy.
Oh, wow.
It's heavy stuff, but it's a really important point.
It is, and it reminds me of that example from the video about the ordinary men who became Nazi soldiers in World War II.
Oh, yeah.
Like, how is it possible for people to do those kinds of things?
Well, the video talks about how some of them, like, they actually felt physically sick at first when they had to commit these atrocities.
Right.
But over time, they became numb to it,
That's so disturbing.
It is. It's like situational forces and repeated exposure to violence. It can just, like, totally erode your moral compass.
So it's a combination of those external pressures and our own internal vulnerabilities.
Yeah, exactly.
And in the Focus Fam motivation video, They mention how this whole process, it's often fueled by like a combination of vengefulness and sadism.
Yeah, there's like this dark feedback loop, right? Yeah. Each act of cruelty makes you want to do more.
Oh, that's scary.
And one thing that the Jordan B. Peterson clips video really emphasizes is that evil often doesn't look like monstrous. It doesn't have this like obvious scary face.
So you can't always spot it right away.
Right. It can look totally normal, like the guy next door.
Wow.
They have this story about a prisoner, seemed like a regular guy, but he had done these horrifically violent things.
It's like that saying, right? The devil doesn't always wear a red suit and horns. Sometimes he wears a suit and tie.
Exactly. And there's this philosopher, Hannah Arendt. She called it the banality of evil.
The banality of evil.
Yeah, the idea that evil is often very ordinary, very everyday.
So it could be your quiet neighbor or that, like, seemingly charming coworker who gossips behind everyone's back.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to not judge a book by its cover, to really pay attention to people's actions.
The Jordan B. Peterson clips video also talks about meeting pedophiles who, like, outwardly appear totally normal.
Yeah, really nondescript.
But then you hear them talk or you see what they do and it's just
chilling. Right.
Yeah. And it makes you wonder, like, how well do we actually know anyone?
That's the scary part. It's a good reminder to trust your gut.
Right.
And to really pay attention to those red flags.
Okay, well, speaking of insidious forms of evil, I want to switch gears a bit and talk about malignant narcissists.
Oh, yeah.
The Academy of Ideas video goes deep on this, and they start with this really powerful quote from M. Scott Peck's book, People of the Lie.
Okay.
He says, and I'm just going to read this, "Evil is not committed by people who feel uncertain about their righteousness, who question their own motives, who worry about betraying themselves. The evil in this world is committed by the spiritual fat cats, by the Pharisees of our own day, the self-righteous who think they are without sin because they are unwilling to suffer the discomfort of significant self-examination."
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful.
It is, and it really gets at the heart of malignant narcissism, right?
Right. It's like these people, they have this huge sense of self-importance.
Yeah.
And they think they're morally superior, but they have zero empathy and no self-awareness.
So they're completely blind to their own flaws.
Totally. And they end up projecting all their darkness onto other people.
So they create this distorted reality where they're always the victim.
Exactly. And we see this all the time in politics, right?
Oh, for sure.
Politicians who refuse to admit they're wrong, they just blame everyone else for their problems.
It's like a classic case of scapegoating.
It is. And the video talks about how we all need to be careful about doing that ourselves,
Right, like not just pointing fingers at others and calling them evil.
Yeah, the real challenge is to look inward and be honest about our own capacity for darkness.
It's a good reminder that the line between good and evil, it doesn't run between people. It runs through each of us.
Exactly. And that's why self-awareness is so important.
Okay, I want to shift gears again and talk about the Stanford prison experiment.
Oh, yeah. Classic study.
Psych2Go and TED videos talk about this experiment where they took a bunch of college students, totally normal guys, randomly assigned them to be either guards or prisoners.
Right.
And the results were just, like, insane.
Oh, yeah. It's a perfect example of Philip Zimbardo's Lucifer Effect.
The Lucifer Effect?
Yeah, the idea that the situation you're in, the system you're part of, it can actually corrupt you even if you're a good person.
So in the experiment, like, the guards became super abusive.
Yeah, and authoritarian really fast.
And the prisoners, they became, like, totally passive and demoralized.
They just kind of gave up.
It's like they all got lost in their roles.
Right. And one of the things that really contributed to the guards' behavior was anonymity.
Okay.
Like they wore uniforms, they had these batons.
Right.
And they were just called guard. So they lost their individual identities.
The individuation.
Exactly. And when that happens, it becomes way easier to do bad things because you don't feel personally responsible.
And we see that all the time in the real world.
Right. At the time.
Like the TED video mentions a study that found that warriors who, like, change their appearance before battle, they're way more likely to commit atrocities.
It's like putting on a mask. It frees you from your inhibitions.
And Zimbardo, in the Psych2Go video, he says, if you want to change a person, change the situation.
That's a good one.
So are we sometimes too focused on blaming individuals? Like, do we not pay enough attention to the systems and environments that shape behavior?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. We all like to think we're in control,
Right.
But the truth is, our environment has a huge influence on us.
So if we want to make the world a better place, we have to think bigger than just individual change.
We have to think about the systems, the institutions, the cultures.
So things like promoting transparency, accountability, fairness.
Absolutely. And fostering empathy, diversity, encouraging critical thinking.
Challenging the status quo, speaking up against injustice.
All of that. It's about recognizing that we're all connected,
Yeah.
that our actions have these ripple effects.
The TED video talks about this idea of shifting from like a medical model to a public health approach.
Oh, interesting.
So instead of just focusing on individuals who are sick, you look at the social and environmental factors that are making people sick.
Right. It's like preventative medicine for society.
It reminds me of that idea from the Channel 5 Clips video about like a spiritual sickness in society.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just about bad people.
It's deeper than that.
It's like this overall sense of like apathy and alienation.
Yeah, like a loss of meaning.
And the video talks about how we need to address those deeper needs.
For sure. People need to feel like they matter, that their lives have purpose.
Nurturing hope, resilience, reminding people that their actions can make a difference.
Exactly. Even in the face of all this darkness, it's important to remember that the human spirit is incredibly strong.
Yeah, and capable of so much good.
We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
Explored some pretty dark stuff.
Yeah, but also some hopeful stuff too, right?
For sure. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that the line between good and evil, it's not set in stone.
Yeah, like it's not predetermined.
It's a choice we make every single day.
And that's a pretty powerful thought, right? Like we all have the capacity for both.
We do. The question is, which will we choose to nurture?
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. I know it's been like a lot.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
But super important.
Absolutely.
Hopefully you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
It's been a pleasure being here.
And remember, even small acts of courage and kindness can make a huge difference.
They really can.
All right. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep choosing the light. I don't know about you, but I always kind of end up feeling overwhelmed after deep dives like this.
Yeah, I get it.
Like it's a lot to take in, you know?
Yeah, especially with a topic like this.
And then it's like, okay, what do I actually do with this information?
Right.
It can feel like, how can we even make a dent in all this? Like with so much bad stuff happening in the world all the time.
Yeah, I hear that. It's easy to get caught up in that feeling of powerlessness, but I think it's important to remember that even small acts of like courage and kindness, they can have a ripple effect.
They can.
Yeah, you don't have to be a superhero to make a positive impact.
One thing that I keep coming back to from this deep dive is how much we underestimate the power of the situation. Like, we're so quick to blame individuals for their actions.
Right.
But we don't always consider the context, like what led them to that point.
That's a huge point. It's like one of the foundational principles of social psychology.
Yeah.
Think about the Stanford prison experiment, Milgram's obedience studies.
Right.
Even like real world stuff like Abu Ghraib.
Right.
All these examples show just how much situations can influence behavior, often in ways that we just don't expect.
So to really create change, it can't just be about like individual accountability.
It's got to be bigger than that.
We have to look at the systems.
Yeah, the environment.
That make those bad behaviors more likely to happen in the first place.
For sure. So like designing systems that prioritize transparency, accountability, fairness. And culturally, it's about promoting empathy, diversity, critical thinking.
Yeah, and being willing to like challenge the status quo.
Absolutely. To call out those systems and structures that like perpetuate injustice.
Ultimately, we're all connected, right?
We are.
What I do impacts you. What you do impacts me.
It's a web.
It is. And the TED video, it talks about how we need to move away from what they call a medical model, which focuses on individual pathology, and move towards more of a public health approach.
Interesting.
So instead of just like treating the symptoms of violence or prejudice or bullying, you try to address the underlying social and environmental causes.
So like preventative care for society.
Yeah.
I like that.
It's kind of like that idea from the Channel 5 Clips video about it, like a spiritual sickness that's affecting society.
Oh, yeah, that was a good one.
Like it's not just about, bad people.
There's something deeper going on.
Yeah, like this broader cultural malaise that leads to, apathy, alienation.
Yeah, like this sense of meaninglessness.
And so the video talks about how we need to, address those deeper needs that people have.
For sure, like the need for meaning, for purpose, for belonging.
Nurturing hope, resilience.
Exactly. Reminding people that they matter, that they can make a difference.
Because even in the face of all this darkness, The human spirit is still capable of amazing things.
It is.
Acts of courage, compassion, creativity.
It gives me hope.
Yeah, me too. Well, we've covered a lot in this deep dive.
A lot.
Explored some really, really dark corners of human nature.
Yeah, we went there.
But I think we also found some glimmers of hope along the way.
For sure. For me, the biggest takeaway is that the line between good and evil, it's not fixed.
Yeah, it's not like we're all destined to be one or the other.
It's a choice we make every single day.
And that's a powerful reminder, isn't it?
Yeah.
That we have the capacity for both.
We do. It's just about which one we choose to cultivate.
Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this deep dive. I know it was intense, but hopefully you found it insightful and maybe even a little bit inspiring.
It was a pleasure being here.
And just remember, even the smallest acts of courage and kindness, they can have a huge impact.
Don't underestimate yourself.
All right, until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep choosing the light.